Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 2nd of May, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that easily by phone by calling the Alaska Weather Information Line 1-800-472-0391. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska. And if you want to go directly to the Alaska River Watch page, head to weather.gov/APRFC. That's Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center for short. If you can't find what you're looking for, whether it's forecast information, river watch, and river information for your part of Alaska, you're looking for aviation information and have questions about what you're finding or not finding, feel free to send me an email at david.snider@noaa.gov. I'm happy to serve you any way I possibly can. Here's a look at the hazardous weather across southwest Alaska tonight. This will be our focus, mainly between Aniak and Calskag. A flood advisory is still in effect for Aniak at this point. That'll go until about 11 o'clock on your Thursday morning. There is flooding, though pretty minor it sounds like, around the Aniak area. River Watch teams have detected another ice jam around Calskag, and with that and the ice jam around Aniak, those two areas there are going to be very important to watch over the next 24 hours. We're concerned that if the ice goes out at Aniak and then the ice doesn't go out in Calskag, there could be some flooding there in about 30 to 60 minutes. So for the area around Calskag and the lower Kuskokwim Delta region, a flood watch has been posted there. We'll continue to monitor that situation until things change, but if you're in that area in the lower Kuskokwim Valley, you'll want to keep special attention on the river conditions there and what the River Watch teams are telling you as they're moving through. We have a team from the National Weather Service and the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center out in the Aniak and Calskag area. And they're working with the Alaska State Office of Emergency Management and to make sure that your villages are safe and have the very best information up and down river as the river breaks up there on the Cusco. So make sure that you're listening and paying attention to that information as they have it, and make sure that you're sharing the information that you see about your river. And that way they can pass that information on to more parts of southwestern Alaska and help keep all of us safe as we go through the rest of the breakup season. Now, what about breakup conditions where you are? Here's a look at the breakup map for Wednesday afternoon. As you can see, all of the Yukon is still mostly ice. River conditions there haven't been changing. We are expecting to see some changes, though, probably as we head toward the end of the week and early into the weekend, as warm south winds will be blowing over the mountains and warming up a large part of the eastern interior. That may at least begin some of the changes that'll start to open up the river. So don't be surprised if you hear some of that. Of course, we know that the Tanana River has been opening up. The Nenana ice tripod fell yesterday, and as a result of that, of course, that is the signal that the ice is going out there at Nenana. It hasn't gone out downstream, though, that we know of just yet. And then, of course, we're watching for areas around Aniak and Calskag, where the water is open above Aniak, but not below, with two ice jams there, one at Aniak and one at Calskag. We're watching for potential trouble. Hopefully there is none, but if things work out just right, and both of those jams will let out, hopefully close to the same time, there won't be a whole lot of trouble. But the potential is there for flooding around Calskag and above, so we're monitoring that situation carefully and make sure you're doing the same. Here's a look at the satellite picture now. And onto the visible satellite. It's that time of the year. If you were in outer space looking down at planet Earth, this is kind of what you'd see looking at Alaska. Our next big weather maker is this low right here across the southern Bering Sea and the northern Gulf. It is pushing a lot of southerly flow out across the northern Gulf, a lot of warmth, a lot of moisture with that. And as that continues to work its way from west to east, we'll start to see a better chance of rain and wind developing across south central, southwest, and snow possible still for many parts of the north and western communities. Now, we also have a southwesterly flow heading into southeastern Alaska. This brought some rain across the region, even though there was some weak high-pressure ridging in the area just not that long ago. This is now moving out of the area and some of the clouds are breaking up, but you can still see that we're going to get another surge of that moisture heading right back into southeast as we get toward the end of the week. Up north, clouds covering the north slope and a large part of the interior there after a half-inch of snow fell in Fairbanks and some of the surrounding communities earlier today. For a while, that snow was really coming down, enough to bring the visibility down as well, but a half-inch, I believe, was the official report out of that. So yeah, it did snow on the 2nd of May in Fairbanks, so that's what we get for living in Alaska, right? Here's a look up north, and you can see cold air is trapped up across the central and western parts of the Brooks Range. Snow is falling there for Norton Sound, Kotzebue Sound, and into the Seward Peninsula. This will continue to be the case as we head toward the end of the week. Low pressure sitting across southwest is what we're watching for to move across the western Gulf and into south central Alaska. Here we go for tonight. Take a look at that number, 986. That means it is intensifying and strengthening as we get into the Gulf. The winds will start to pick up a little bit more from the south. We're going to push a lot more moisture toward Prince William Sound, the Kenai Peninsula, southwest, and the Aleutian Chain. Many areas there from Prince William Sound toward the Kenai Peninsula have the potential of seeing some heavy rain. And notice we're also getting into some more rain for southeast. Even as high pressure sitting here, it probably won't be enough to protect most of central and northern parts of southeast as we head into tomorrow. Snow is also possible for some parts of the interior and the west. A much better chance of that the further west you go, because that's where the deepest cold's going to be. And another piece of the puzzle is what we see coming across the North Pacific. Nothing too terribly strong just yet, but this is going to hold back at least some of the heavier precipitation and moisture tonight as this moves into better position by Thursday. Everything's lining up to get that deep southerly flow stretched out across the north and western Gulf, and now we've got more rain moving into Prince William Sound, Kodiak Island, and the Alaska Peninsula, and parts of southwest. Notice how that warm air is spreading northward as well. North of the Alaska Range, things are going to dry out a little bit more. We're still seeing a decent push of moisture trying to make it up over the mountains, but a lot of this is going to dry up as it moves over the higher terrain. Now, as we get into southeast, we still have our ridge right about here, but we also have that southerly flow moving into the outer coast, and more parts of southeast will be getting wetter as we get into Thursday and Friday. Out across the west, St. Lawrence Island, Gamble, and Savunga, all the way down to St. Paul and St. George and the central chain, have the potential of seeing snow showers on the backside of the system, and that doesn't change as we get into Friday. Low pressure hovers around 970 millibars west of Lake Iliamna. You can still see some rain falling across the region, and more of that is spreading northward. Look for rain and snow showers up across the central and eastern interior. A lot of that drying out just north of the Alaska Range, though. Our deepest, strongest southerly flow is moving through Prince William Sound at this point, into the Chugach, and then into parts of northern southeast. You can see the rain still filling in across the central and southern parts of the Panhandle. We're going to be watching the wind across south central and southwest. You should too if you've got flying plans on Friday, especially from south central to southwest and back, or from north areas into south central. This could change some of your flying plans. So just keep an eye on the visibility, and we'll talk more about that here in flying weather in just a minute. Here's a look at your forecast temperatures quickly tonight. 30s and 40s for southeast, south central, above freezing. The interior looking at temps below freezing there, mid to upper 20s, single digits and teens in the north and in the west, upper 20s and lower 30s there into Bristol Bay, above freezing for many in southwest, with highs there tomorrow back in the lower to mid 40s. The central and middle Tanana areas there, you're looking at mid to upper 40s, south central closer to 50 degrees, southeast upper 40s to lower 50s, the north slope teens and 20s. Overnight lows there on Friday back in the single digits, southwest above freezing, south central closer to 40, southeast also looking at lower 40s, the middle Tanana Valley and the central interior just a hair below freezing for Friday morning, but warming up significantly into the lower 50s. Again, this could have some breakup implications for the upper Yukon. Upper 40s and low 50s for south central, southeast, also mild, and 40s for many parts of southwestern Alaska going into Friday afternoon.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to flying weather now. Widespread IFR is expected again across the North Slope and all the way south of the Brooks Range through Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass and westward toward the Kobuk and Noatak valleys, over the interior of the Seward Peninsula, and maybe a little bit northward toward places like Shishmaref and southward just about to Nome. As you look at Bristol Bay all the way out toward the Pribilofs, IFR is going to start your day there, as well as some of the western Alaska Range passes, and just south of Iliamna you might catch a break, but then it fills back in across the Aleutian Range. For parts of southeast, hit and miss, mainly across the Wrangell-St. Elias Range and just into Chilkoot and White Pass, maybe just north of Juneau and areas around the Misty Fjords. As we get into the afternoon, improvements once again, just like we were talking about yesterday. We'll see some daytime improvements, but then slam back down to low ceilings and low vis as we get into early morning hours there. IFR conditions expected to cross the higher train in southeast through the afternoon, though, and as a strong southerly push works up against the mountains, blocking that moisture, trying to wring that out, you're going to see more clouds and low decks develop here as we get across the afternoon and evening hours, just due to precipitation and cloud cover itself. Watch for IFR to linger across some parts of the coastal plain and then also across southwestern Alaska, mainly around Cape Newenham, just south of the Kuskokwim Delta. MVFR for just about everywhere else. Some exceptions, the middle and upper Yukon Valley. Might see a little bit of VFR for the afternoon. Here's Friday morning. Look, there it is again. IFR widespread across the north, the interior of the Seward Peninsula, southwest, hit and miss around Kodiak, and then IFR across some of the coastal ranges there all the way through southeast, most of southeast. Again, looks slammed down pretty hard there with IFR conditions in the morning. Some improvements in the afternoon there, but you can still see the effects of that strong southerly push working through the Gulf. IFR is back across the western Alaska range for the afternoon, so some back and forth flights from south central to southwest. Keep an eye on that. And IFR conditions across the north slope again. Hit and miss, but MVFR again still fairly widespread across the north, the west, south central, and certainly southeast, filling in the gaps where IFR isn't quite so prevalent. Here's your pass conditions then. Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass, we expect to see IFR to start with MVFR by the afternoon. Some improvements will be possible there. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass look to be down pretty hard for IFR conditions most of your Thursday. Watch for a couple breaks in the afternoon, if any. IFR conditions there for Rainy Pass. Looks like we'll see probably limited visibility through a good part of the day as that southerly flow sets up. Some improvements possible a little bit further east as you go. Windy Pass, MVFR by the afternoon. Same goes for Isabel Pass, and Mentasta Pass holds at marginal levels most of your Thursday. Tanita Pass, we expect to see it leaning over toward and worsening toward IFR as the afternoon goes on. You'll start down pretty hard in the morning on Friday as well. Portage Pass, mainly the Prince William Sound side, but that does affect east-west travel there, so keep your eye on that, especially Prince William Sound side. And Chilkoot and White Pass we expect to hold at IFR through most of your day. Here's freezing levels. The surface freezing line now is taking a jog northward, but the levels aloft still hovering over the Gulf and the North Pacific, anywhere from 2 to about 8,000 feet across central and southern parts of southeast over the Gulf. And then here's your 2,000-foot freezing line around AKwx and then south of Sand Point and south of the central chain. So not a whole lot of overrunning with this, which is good. But we still have a wealth of warm and wet air that's just waiting to push northward, and it's going to change things up here once it finally does so. Icing potential is pretty high up there at this point, anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000 feet. Looking at isolated moderate to be fairly widespread across the west, and then certainly across south central and southeast. These levels may be climbing up too as we get into Thursday, and that strong, deep southerly flow keeps pushing in there. So that's a little bit of good news perhaps. As we get into the jet stream, you'll notice this deep trough forming across the Bering Sea. As that continues to dig, we get into a stronger southerly flow across south central and southeastern Alaska, but that also means there's a lot of cold air still lingering here. And for those of you that keep getting snow, that's why all this cold air keeps building southward across the region. But for Thursday, we're developing more of a southerly flow across south central, the interior, and southeast. You can see wind speeds anywhere from 15 to 45 knots across the open Gulf, 40 to 60 knots between Kodiak Island and Sand Point, the interior 10 to 20. And then here's our northerly flow on the back side, anywhere from 20 to 30 knots there at 3,000 feet. More of a northeasterly flow across the open waters of the Bering. There's our southerly flow, anywhere from about 15 to 55 knots across the Gulf. Southeast winds are coming up for you, especially in the northern Gulf there. The interior fairly light, only about 10 knot winds for the moment. Here's turbulence then. I've considerable moderate around Prince William Sound and the northern Gulf below 4,000 feet from Lake Iliamna in the western Alaska range to Kodiak and out toward Sand Point. And then from Nikolsky westward all the way toward Atka below about 3,000 feet. And look for at least some chop from the Yukon Delta west toward the Pribilofs.
Technology. It's the rhythm of our everyday life. We're more dependent on satellite and communication systems than at any other time in history. Disruptions can affect our economy and even our safety. To prepare for the effects of such events and minimize impacts, we need to look outside our atmosphere, some 93 million miles away, at a star we call the Sun. It's our main energy source. It warms the Earth and grows our food. While the Sun and the space between may seem pleasant from our perspective, it's anything but peaceful. At its surface exists a chaotic state of eruptions and radiation. And unlike Vegas, what happens at the sun doesn't stay at the sun.
Space weather is essentially emissions from the sun, radiation, magnetic field that erupts from the solar surface, pumped out into space, sometimes right towards Earth. When it impacts the Earth, it impacts our technology. That's what we call space weather.
These solar events and their effects at Earth can disrupt systems we take for granted. From causing blackouts to the power grid, to delaying offshore drilling operations due to inaccurate GPS data. Interference with communication systems can force air traffic to reroute and impact rescue response and coordination. Outside our atmosphere, solar radiation can harm astronauts and the systems they depend on. The good news is that these eruptions can be detected early. Forecasters at the NOAA Space Weather Prediction Center in Boulder, Colorado, have their eyes on the sun at all times.
The Space Weather Prediction Center is part of the National Weather Service and is very much like a normal weather forecast office. We're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're looking at data, we're looking at imagery, we're looking at model outputs. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches of imminent activity to our customers so they can take action.
In many ways, forecasting space weather is a lot like forecasting hurricanes. Those who rely on space weather forecasts, like electric power grid managers, are informed early on and can begin taking protective action.
When we see an eruption on the sun, space weather forecasters will issue a watch. This is much like a hurricane watch. When a hurricane sits offshore of Miami, for example, perhaps 48 hours out, we too can see way in advance that something may be coming towards the Earth.
As the storm moves toward us, it hits a monitoring spacecraft orbiting 1 million miles away from Earth.
It's kind of our buoy sitting out there offshore, and that hurricane, about 30-45 minutes before it makes landfall, we'll get the measurements from the buoy. That's what this spacecraft does for us. That big eruption that left the sun hits the spacecraft. Now we've got the measurements of exactly what's going to impact us here on Earth, and we issue the warnings to give the power grid a heads up that the storm is now imminent. An interesting element to this whole process is that when the forecasters issue the alert, the power grid receives the alert, takes the necessary actions to protect the grid, and the average citizen never knows anything ever happened.
The number of customers who rely on space weather information continues to grow. As our reliance on technology increases, so will our need for constant monitoring of the sun.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
GPS has changed society. Most people don't realize how remarkable and how many different applications there are.
The GPS has become an integral part, not just of our daily lives as far as cell phones and guidance for our cars and mapping, but the whole system in agriculture is really relying heavily on high accuracy GPS.
So they're using GPS to plant those seeds with centimeter accuracy. And then they can come behind it and irrigate and fertilize right where that seed is with that 1 centimeter accuracy.
The GPS creates a line for the operator that he can steer along, or you go to another level and the operator doesn't steer anymore and the tractor has an automatic steering system on it, much like a cruise control on a car, except for when I push the button it doesn't drive a set speed. When I push a button it stays on a predefined line.
You don't even need lights. You can do it at nighttime. You program your GPS and it's driving that tractor for you. So it's huge, and it's changing the way that the farmers farm the fields.
6 or 7 days out.
There's an interest in GPS applications from space weather side because when the sun is eruptive, it causes GPS to falter, and in some cases it doesn't work at all.
Productivity may suffer to a certain degree in that there's no way that I as a human being can steer as good 8 hours a day as a GPS system's going to do. It's going to be the same all day long. Some of the other application technologies, those are going to be gone. We're not going to have the ability to do good section control on sprayers and planters and fertilizer applicators without GPS.
We see a huge growing customer base in so many different industries, so many different sectors now relying on GPS and high precision GPS. All big customers for us.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And time now for a look at your sea ice update. This is updated from yesterday, the sea ice program, getting the very latest analysis there. If you want today's newest imagery, make sure you go to weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. But a quick update on what we're seeing here is there's not a whole lot of ice left south of the Bering Strait. So we know a lot of this is really rotting away fairly quickly, and there are some more changes inside of Kotzebue Sound. So make sure you check on that. We will show you some of the latest information across the marine areas in southeast. Stronger southerly winds will develop around the Lynn Canal up to 25 knots and 5-foot seas there. South and southeasterlies in the central and southern inside passages only around 10 to 15 knots or so with 2 to 3 foot seas. Southerlies picking up across the outer coast anywhere from 15 to about 25 knots and seas coming up to about 7 feet on Thursday. For Friday, look at the gusts coming up inside of Stevens Passage. Gust to 40 there with 5-foot seas, 6-foot seas in the Lynn Canal. And southerlies stay steady across the outer coast, 20 to 30 knots. And seas about 5 to 9 feet there, the highest outside of Yakutat, and even higher as you go out toward Prince William Sound. Those winds coming into the east and southeast on Thursday for Prince William Sound and outside of Montague Island. Notice those higher seas stretching out there toward southeast. Easterlies blowing into the Kenai Fjords area, about 7-foot seas expected there. North and easterly winds coming down Cook Inlet, 15-knot winds up north, 30 knots west of the Barrens. For Friday, the winds really coming up sharply as low pressure is deepening out to the west and south, 30 to 40-knot winds in many areas there. Inside Prince William Sound, 30 knots with a 7-foot sea, 11 to 15-foot seas there across the outer coast of the Kenai Peninsula. 25-knot winds in the north with northeasterly winds in northern Cook Inlet and east and southeasterly winds west of the Barrens and east, or west, I should say, of Homer and south of Kenai. As we get into Thursday, southwesterly flow over parts of the Alaska Peninsula, 20 to 25 knots. You're looking at about 5-foot seas inside of Bristol Bay to 10-foot seas on the south side of the peninsula and Pacific coast. Easterlies inside of Shelikof Strait, southwesterlies across the eastern coast of Kodiak Island to Akyok with 25 knots and 9-foot seas there. By Friday, of course, we know the winds are coming up there with that deepening area of low pressure right about here. Southerlies in Shelikof Strait, 13-foot seas there, 18-foot seas east of Kodiak Island and moving into the western Gulf. 12 to 19-foot seas across the Alaska Peninsula waters of the Pacific coast. Northerlies inside of Bristol Bay, 6-foot seas there. Northwesterlies down the Bering Sea coast with an 11-foot sea and even higher seas as you move back to the west into that wraparound flow. For Thursday, across the chain, 25 to 30 knot winds, 8 to 9 foot seas in most areas, 7 to 8 foot seas across the Pacific coast with that west and northwesterly flow. You'll see that pick up just a little bit more for the central and eastern chain as we get into your Friday. The highest seas north of Unalaska and Nikolsky, you're looking at 16 to 17 foot seas in the coastal areas, but as you get offshore, that'll probably climb just a little bit higher, closer to that 20-foot mark as you head east of the Pribilof. So watch for that area there if you're heading out. To the west, westerly flow across Kiska and Shemya, 9 foot seas on a 25 knot westerly wind. For Thursday, north and easterly winds coming out of Norton Sound over Nunivak Island and toward the Pribilofs, 20 to 30 knot winds in all areas. Expect seas to come up to about 7 to 11 feet between St. Matthew, St. Paul, and St. George. Northeasterlies north of Nunivak Island with an 8-foot sea there along the coast, coming up to 11-foot seas by Friday. Northerlies expected to hold around St. Lawrence Island towards St. Matthew and the Pribilofs again, but notice those winds around the Pribilofs and the seas are coming up to about 35 knots with a 14-foot sea, all moving in from the north and west for Friday. Now here's a look at the north slope. Easterlies continue over the ice, still have solid ice pack there, about 10 knots or so. North and easterly winds down the Chukchi coast, and we expect that we'll see about 10 to 15 knot winds coming offshore as we go through your Thursday. For Friday, north and easterly winds are expected to continue. Look at the winds picking up, though, around the Chukchi coast, 20 to 25 knots with 5-foot seas at their highest. They're generally west of Cape Lisburne and Point Hope, with northerlies south of the Bering Strait, 25 knots, 7-foot seas coming into St. Lawrence Island to wrap up the week. Recapping your weather tonight, we've added a flood watch for the lower Kuskokwim Delta region around Kalskag, and upriver, a flood advisory continues around Aniak. 2 ice jams there now on the Cusco are making the hydrologists there at the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center concerned for potential flooding and Kalskag and above. There's 2 ice jams. Both of them need to let go to improve river conditions. So at this moment, a flood watch for the Kalskag area and a flood advisory because of flooding ongoing in the Aniak area. We're also watching for the development of southerly winds moving across south central and southwestern Alaska, more rain heading for southeast, and low pressure moving into the Bristol Bay area as we wrap up the week with some higher elevation snow expected in the region. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.